All right, good morning, everybody. Great to see you this morning. So glad that you are with us. If you are a guest, you came at a great time. We are in the middle of the series about relationships. And I just want to thank this church for not just embracing, but wholeheartedly embracing this, especially those of you that are maybe a little bit older or you're married already. This is a specific series that we're doing. It hits every broad range, but in specific, I want to be as practical as I can with the next generation. I want to be as clear as I can with the next generation. And so, especially for those of you that are single, this series is for you. And I want to thank this church. We believe in the next generation. We believe that God's purpose, His destiny in their lives is too great. And we all know that one of the biggest things that most people will wreck themselves on is relationships. And so I want to help, and I want to thank this church for being a part with me and helping the next generation get this. And I also want you to get it so that you can communicate it to your grandkids and to the people that you come in contact with, because this truth that God has for us in relationships is way too important to keep secret. And I think that most of the time, next generation just has to fumble themselves through this and try and figure it out. And we don't want that to happen. We want to be as clear as we can. Because we know that God has a design for everything. Come on. He has a good design for everything, especially relationships. He wants us to flourish in our relationships. And as we talked about last week, we don't flourish when we live against God's design. You and I are not smarter. There's not a hidden wisdom that God didn't consider. God is a good God, and He created everything with a good design and purpose behind it. And it's meant to cause us as individuals to flourish, us as a society to flourish. And when we do live our life against God's design, we don't flourish as individuals. The people in contact with us don't flourish. And our ability to communicate what God's kingdom really looks like gets really confusing. So right now, the way that, followers of Christ live and the way that people who don't follow Christ live, sometimes it looks so similar that it's really confusing, especially when it comes to this relationship thing. Especially when it comes to sexuality. Especially when it comes to cohabitation. Especially when it comes to what is norm in our culture is not necessarily God's design. When we live against it, we end up injuring ourselves, but we also end up making it really confusing for those who are really seeking to follow Christ and to want to be in a relationship with Him. All you who are followers of Christ, can you say amen? Amen to that? Yeah. Isn't that true? Yeah. I mean, it's hard to see the difference. So today, I want to go through some scripture, but I want to go through some really practical things especially for us single adults. And if you're married, you're going to listen to some of these things, you're going to go, I didn't even get to that. Maybe I need to go back and do that. And I would encourage you, go back and do some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And this is why this is so important, is because every weekend, and here's why, literally every day, there are people who are coming to an altar and they are making a vow to each other. And they are committing and making a promise to somebody that they are not prepared to keep. They're making a promise, but they're just not prepared to keep it. And it's not that they don't want to. It's not that they're not going to try to. The problem is they're just not prepared to do it. And I don't know what it is about marriage and about this thing in particular, this wedding ring. But people have this mysterious perception that when you put this thing on your finger, it changes who you were or are. And you know what? After I put this ring on my finger, I was the same guy I was before after I put that ring on. A ring does not change a thing. That's the title of the message. It doesn't change a thing. Whoever you were before you made that commitment, you will be after you make that commitment. And if you haven't prepared to make that commitment, just being in love and making the commitment is not enough for you to follow through with the commitment. It's just like I would love to run the marathon. I really would. In fact, I am tempted to sign up for it so that I can get a t-shirt. Like some of you are laughing because you're thinking the same thing, right? But the commitment to run the marathon is not the same thing as actually finishing the marathon.
That's right.
The reason why I haven't done it, my wife said that's right, is because she trained for it, she prepared for it. I didn't prepare for it. So making a commitment to is easy. It's the actual following through that's hard. The only way to follow through is to prepare for it, right? If you have kids who are getting ready to take the SAT, they can tell you all they want. Mom, I'm going to ace this SAT. I'm going to do so well on this SAT. You know, you got to get ready. I'm going to do so great on the SAT. A commitment to do great on the SAT is nothing without the preparation to do great on the SAT, right? I took the MCAT when I was in college. If you're a college student, you know this. You can go in as confident as you want to take a test. But if you haven't prepared to take that test, your ability to actually follow through with your commitment is small, right?
Yeah.
I can tell you next weekend, I would love to say next weekend, I'm gonna dazzle you and preach in Japanese. It ain't gonna happen today. Because the only Japanese I know is domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. And I'm not even sure if that's like a thing or not. That's pretty much it. It's not gonna happen because I've not prepared. And so, single folks, as we're, and I think this is where it gets confusing, we spend a lot of time looking for the right one. And there's a little bit of an essence that if I find the right one, then whatever is wrong with me will be fixed. And so some of you, you're a little bit older, you're thinking the same thing though. After I did one of these series, I had a 55-year-old woman come up to me and said, you know, I know you were speaking to singles, but you know, I'm divorced, and surely that I'm past all that stuff. No, not really. It's the same truth for them as it is for all of us.
Yeah.
And so it's the preparation to make the commitment that really is the important part. It is the commitment to be the person that can actually follow through with your commitment that God is really after in our lives. And that the person that you someday want to bless in marriage and be blessed with will really be after. It's that piece of character. It's that who you are becoming, not just finding the right person, but becoming the right person. So I want to encourage us today, as I think the scriptures do and as God does, to prepare to become the kind of person that can follow through with the commitment that someday you may make. To instead of looking for and hoping to find the right one, becoming the right one, becoming that right person. And I want to look in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and we're literally going to read through this whole thing in little pieces, and so we're going to skip through it. I would encourage you to go check this out. And if you've never read the Bible, I would encourage you to open that thing up and begin to look at it, because there is so much just wisdom beyond just what God says. There is so much wisdom just for practical living. And what we're about to read, this guy named Paul wrote to this church, a bunch of followers of Christ, in a really interesting environment called Corinth. Corinth was a port town, and lots of people were coming in and out. And Corinth was known for two different things. Number one, it had about 12 different temples to different gods. Okay, so it had different temples to gods, and it was really known for its lax sexual morality. One of the temples was to a temple to the god called Aphrodite. And in that temple, they employed about 1,000 prostitutes to carry out the ritual of their worship. So these are new followers of Christ who've been immersed in this culture. They've grown up with it. So as far as people going to the temple to engage in sexual acts, that's just part of their culture, just part of their lifestyle. In fact, it got so crazy. Now, Paul is trying to, in the midst of a really crazy culture, in fact, the word Corinthianize came to be synonymous with like the F word. It literally meant to practice sexual immorality. The Corinthians had become so prolific at this that's what they became known for. So if you're now just wanting to follow Christ in the midst of this culture, it's really confusing, especially if you're a single person and also if you're a married person as well. And so Paul is trying to give them some clarity in the midst of this. Now what we're about to read is called an epistle. Somebody said, asked me one time, is that the wives of the apostles? That's not the wives of the apostles. These are what are called occasional letters. They were written because of a specific occasion. And in this particular occasion, the Corinthian followers have all these questions for Paul. And so Paul is now addressing their questions. For the first chapters, he has been really strong. Now he's starting to move into not just strength, but also things that are not necessarily spelled out, things that hadn't been dealt with in previous, and he's bringing God's wisdom into his discussion now, okay? You with me? So here's the first thing he's addressing now in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, as we go on here. He answers this question. He says, now for the matters you wrote about, again, this is something they asked him. it is good, and this is what they asked him, according to their culture, this was a saying, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Okay? Think about that. This is what they used to say in their culture. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. To which Paul would say that's true. If you're not married, it is good for you not to have sex outside of the context for which God created it, so that you and I could enjoy the safety and the intimacy of a sexual relationship. So outside of marriage, if you're a single person, you're right. It is good for you not to have sex with a woman. But they were saying this because also in their culture, not only was there rampant sexual immorality, there was rampant asceticism. They had this belief that the fleshly part of their body was different from the soul or spirit part of their body. So that led to two things. That led to people doing whatever they wanted with their body, and it also led to people trying to become spiritually mature through the practice of asceticism. Which, if you're married, this is really bad. Because that means in marriage, a man and a woman weren't engaging in sexual activity. Instead, in fact, the man was going to the prostitute at the temple to practice asceticism in the way that they saw it. And so Paul is saying, wait a minute, if you're single, there is a context for it. It's marriage. Yes, you're right. No sex outside of that. If you're married, that is the context, and that is your obligation to one. I say obligation, but it is your obligation to one another. Because I don't want you to go looking for it outside of marriage and be tempted in some other environment, like the temple, or today, like with somebody else at your office, or today, like somebody else online. So don't do that. Don't withhold from each other what is the privilege of marriage, because if you do, then you put each other in temptation that they are going to have a difficult time with, so don't withhold. So here's what he goes on to say. But since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relationships with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. So this is something that's taught in the Bible. This is just mutual submission. You guys are in marriage, not one higher than the other, not one has one set of rules, one has another. You guys are mutually submitted to one another, and in this relationship you have the privilege and the beauty of this act that brings incredible intimacy. And so the husband should fulfill his duty. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. And in the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. And that is in no way endorsing abuse of any kind or making somebody do something that they don't want to do. That's not what that's saying. That's basically Paul speaking to them about something that had not been elaborated on before, and basically saying, look, the reason that this is okay in marriage is because God created it as such. This is something that God creates us to enjoy. So don't deprive one another, because if you do, somebody is going to be tempted to go look for it outside of marriage. And in marriage, your spouse is the only legitimate source of romance for you. If you're married today, your spouse is the only legitimate. That's basically what Paul is saying. You can't look for it in somebody else. You can't look for it somewhere else. Your spouse, you have eyes for your spouse only. Is what Paul's saying. And so he says, do not deprive each other. So don't go looking for it outside, and don't deprive one another. Enjoy in the marriage relationship that. And I'm going to end there, and married couples can go talk about this afterwards. It's a really fascinating discussion. And as he goes on here, he introduces now this radical new idea. It was new for their culture. And I think it is not necessarily new, but it needs to be adjusted for our culture. And so Paul makes the statement that introduces this radical thought. He says, but I wish everyone were single, just as I am. Yet each person has a special gift. And the word there that says gift is the same word that we use for spiritual gift. It's charisma. Everybody has a special gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. And so Paul, it's really not known whether he was maybe divorced, maybe widowed, but we do know that he doesn't speak about his wife. So in the time that he became a follower of Christ, was writing the Bible, he doesn't speak about his wife. And so he looks at his single state not as a disadvantage, but as an advantage, as an opportunity. Now, in their culture, being single was frowned upon. It was. Not having children were frowned upon, because that, having a family and having children, represented your legacy in your life. So you were considered less than fully human and actual, or not fully human, but fully realized if you did not have a family and children in their culture. There was a lot of pressure for that. Now, family and children are a beautiful thing, and it's part of God's design. However, Paul is basically saying, it's not true, though, that you're not fully actualized and that your potential is limited. It's actually not. In fact, I'm happy this way, and I see it. This is the amazing thing. He said, I see this as a gift. I know what some of you are thinking, especially those of you who are single. Give that gift to somebody else, right? Don't want that gift. Look, all of us will at least experience a portion of that gift. You and I will have a season of singlehood. For some people, God blesses you with that gift for all of your lifetime. That is not a bad thing. That is a God thing. For some of us, it is a season, whether it's a lifetime or a season. Paul says that we should see that as a gift to embrace, to be embraced, and to be utilized, not rejected, not scorned, not like, oh man, but to be utilized to the max. And in fact, if you look at the Christian faith, the leader of the Christian faith, Jesus, you may remember his wife's name. It sounds Japanese. Let's put that up there on the screen. Noname. Because she had no name. Jesus didn't have a wife, right? No, she didn't have a wife. I know it'll hit you when you're driving home. You'll just go, oh, yeah, so funny. I guess not. He didn't have a wife. She didn't have a name. In fact, and Paul as well, who wrote most of the New Testament, a good portion of it, did not have a wife as well. So Paul is not making singlehood and the state of being single a lesser thing. He's saying, if that is the season of life that God has you in, embrace that as a good thing that God wants to utilize in your life. And here's what I want to suggest, and use that season to prepare to become the kind of person that you would want to marry. And instead of looking for the right person, become the right person. And instead of just saying, hey, one day I'm going to make a commitment, I'm going to follow through, prepare to be the kind of person that will follow through with the commitment that you hope to make one day.
That's good.
And so Paul, I think if he were here today, he would say, see your singleness as a gift to be utilized to the max during this season of your life.
Yep.
And so the early church, it did not pressure people to get married. It did not force people or pressure people to get married. And then he goes on here, and through the next couple of sections, he basically says, whatever state you come to Christ in, it's okay. If you're engaged to be married, it's okay. If you're not engaged to be married, that's okay as well. If you're married, that's okay. If you're married to somebody who doesn't believe, it's okay. Don't just change all these things. It's okay. God can work through them all. And then he goes on, he says, what I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. And from now on, so he's going to paint them now a bigger picture of their lives, because sometimes we get so focused in on my singlehood, or I get so focused in on my family. And Paul is going to take this thing to a big picture now, and he says the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they don't. And he's not encouraging anybody to leave their family. What he is encouraging is that the time is short. And the time he's referring to is difficult times are going to come. Persecution was going to come heavy to the church. Heavy. So those who mourn as if they don't, those who are happy as if they were not, those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep, and those who use things of the world as if not engrossed in them, for this world in its present form is passing away. So here's what Paul is communicating. He's saying to them that are in this situation, I know you're focused on this, but there's a bigger issue here. And the bigger issue here is that you are temporary, the world is temporary, and there is going to come an incredible wave of persecution. So I want to prepare you for it. And I want to make sure that in order to endure the persecution, to not let go of your faith, that your life is wrapped around the right thing. Because if your life is wrapped around the temporal things of this world that you cannot keep, and the things that you cannot pass away, you are going to be severely disappointed. And so in the context of relationships, that means that even though marriage and family are a good thing, Paul would say, don't wrap your life around marriage and family. Don't look for your identity there. Because if you do, you will be severely disappointed in the long run. And if you're single, don't wrap your life around being in a romance or in a relationship. I know you don't do this, but there are a lot of people who spend a lot of their time thinking about that day when they will meet that person, and then everything else will be okay. And their identity has not been developed in Christ or in God. Their identity has been developed in a romantic thought. And there are married people whose identity have not, in marriage, look, in marriage, and this may explain some of the angst sometimes that we have in marriage. We're expecting our spouse to give us what only Christ can give you. Yeah. Being married does not, contrary to Jerry Maguire, complete you. It doesn't. It doesn't. It gives you somebody else to go on this journey of becoming the person that God wants you to be. That's what it's about. And it gives us an opportunity to show what the kingdom is like, but it doesn't complete you. Only Christ completes you. Married, not married, Christ is what completes you, is who completes you. Yeah. So if we wrap our lives around family, and if I wrap my life, and I married the best, in my opinion, woman that I know, anyway, she's awesome. Yeah, she just had her birthday, and for 29, she looks even better. But I cannot expect for her to give me and do for me what only God can do for me and give me. I can't. If my identity is wrapped up in being the husband of Chris, the father of Brandon, Justin, Jordan, Jessica, Rebecca, then it is in the wrong place. That is a part of my life, but my identity is as a son of God. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if you wrap your life around romance, if you wrap your life around the family, if you wrap your life around an individual, you will be severely let down because they cannot be God in your life. Only God can be God in your life. So what God wants is for you and I to develop our identity, and I'm going to give us some real practical things as suggestions that I want to give to you. Develop our identity in Him so that we can serve Him with undivided and undistracted devotion. Then everything else falls in place. But if we wrap our life around all those things, then everything will be out of place. And Jesus said this, seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, everything you need will be added to you. So there was an order. Seek me first, wrap yourself around me first, then everything else, relationship and everything else you desire, that God desires for you, that will happen in God's timing. But you begin to seek those things, and we miss the most important things. And so, let's go on here in the scripture, 1 Corinthians 7:35, this is what it says. I am saying this for your own good. This is kind of the summary statement. Not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way. And then he goes on to define what it means to live in a right way. In undivided devotion to the Lord. Right. So whether you're single, whether you're married, your state doesn't matter. Wrap yourself not around an individual, not around an idea, not around romance. Wrap yourself around God. Give Him your undivided, your undistracted devotion. And then all the other things will work out. But it's God first. It's serving God first. It's pleasing God first. In other words, make God your first pursuit. So if you're single, I would tell you this, and you want to write this down in your notes. Run as fast as you can towards God. Go as fast as you can towards God. And if you notice someone is actually able to keep up with you in your pursuit of God, introduce yourself to them. Right? No, it didn't say, I'm not saying chase after everybody, and then if you can fit God into your schedule, kind of fit Him in there to make it all kosher. No. I'm saying run as fast as you can after God. And if you notice, man, this person is going strong with me. Go faster and see if they can keep up. My wife made me, and we promised to each other, we're going to follow God. And this is just the way that I did it. I had said, this is not something I'm just trying to tell you. It's what I have a conviction about. I knew that God was calling me to be a missionary, to go into all the world, preach the gospel, and make disciples. So when I proposed to her, I gave her an out. I said, look, I'm proposing to you. And this sounds so unromantic, right? I know, and it probably was. But I want to let you know what I feel like God has called me to. And if it's not for you, I totally understand. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life together with you. But I love God more, and I want to spend the rest of my life following after what He has. And she said, and the only reason why I proposed to her is because I already knew I could see we were going in the same direction. She said, yeah! She did. She was very calm. Go as fast as you can after God. Here's why. Because a ring doesn't change things. It will not change your character. It will not change who you have always been. If you're looking at stocks, you know that the best predictor of future performance is past performance, right? All it is a predictor, though, not a guarantee. The same thing with a person. The best predictor of future performance is past behavior. So you can't ignore somebody's past. You can't even ignore your own past and expect putting on a ring to just change your past behavior and your past performance. It doesn't happen like that. So if you are single, I want to encourage you to now, when you are probably least motivated, to do the hard work of becoming the right person. The kind of person that can stand at an altar, make a vow to somebody, and actually follow through with that vow. And I want to encourage you to do some very specific things in order to do that. And here's what's going to happen. If you do this, if you commit yourself to do this, then the chances of you finding somebody that match up with your values, what you really consider to be important, and match with you on an emotional, intellectual level, and really on a vision for life level, are really good. Because there's a whole group of people that aren't even in the running anymore because you're headed this way, right? You're committed to becoming this way. So the opportunity, the chance of you finding somebody who's also committed to becoming the right person are exponentially greater than just, doing whatever, just to shoot a bullet in the air somewhere. So I want to give you some very practical things, okay, to become the right person. So here's number one. I think this is the most important one. Address your past. Address your past. Address your past. In fact, if you just come out of a relationship, I would encourage you to address how you're coming out of that relationship. Oftentimes what happens is we go through a bad breakup, right? We go into a new relationship and we're carrying the unforgiveness of that bad breakup into this new relationship. And they're really not the enemy, but you think they're the enemy. And the enemy is the unforgiveness that we carry. And so I want to encourage you, address your past and do the hard work of forgiving that other person. Regardless of who was at fault, the tendency for you and I is to blame our situation on somebody else instead of forgiving and releasing so that you can go free. I'll tell you what happens all the time in marriage. And those of you that are married, you can probably really identify with this, right? You and your spouse are having an interaction. And your spouse is picking up something from you that doesn't seem appropriate to the interaction. You ever had that? Like you have this big blowout, and the problem was actually really Manini. And they're going, why so much hostility and aggression? And then you, on the other hand, you begin to react to that, and this little thing becomes this big thing. Here's why. Because before we had a relationship with our spouse, we had a relationship with our parents. And some of us are carrying incredible angst and hurt from our relationship with our parents into our relationship with our spouse. Yep. And so mom and dad, they weren't there for me, and they should have been there for me. Mom and dad weren't very kind to me. They weren't very supportive to me, and they should have been kind. They should have been supportive. And there's all these issues, and it's not with your spouse. It's actually with mom and dad, and it's just open and unresolved. And I want to encourage you to address your past.
That's right.
Because your spouse will never be able to make your problem right. Because your problem is not with them, it's with mom and dad. And again, for many of us, it's the issue of forgiveness. It's going and saying, God, mom, dad. For me, it was, will you forgive me for being such an idiot? I was such a punk teenager. When I got married and issues started coming up in our marriage, I realized that, I'm just carrying some unforgiveness toward what were really great parents. And so I remember just going and unloading, and I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for acting like this. And how mom and dads are. They had forgotten by that time. They're like, oh, we don't remember that. Oh, just trust me. Jerk. But address your past. Now, if you're married, I just saved you a lot of counseling time, right? Maybe the problem is there are still some outstanding issues with our parents. Second thing, men, this is for men in particular, practice treating the women in your life with honor. Practice treating the women in your life with honor. Look, if you do that one thing alone, your stock as a single man will rise exponentially. Because we live in a culture of dishonor. We live in a culture where men treat women as commodities, things to be owned and traded, rather than God's beautiful creation, His daughter. So guys, when you go out on a date, you're not just taking a man's daughter out on a date. You're taking God's daughter out on a date.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when that father says, I want you to be home at 12 o'clock, whatever, and you go, he's just a man. He might be, but your heavenly Father has got a big old shotgun up. And He said to bring my daughter home at 12 o'clock. Because it's not just God to whom we're accountable. Not just man, it is God. Those are God's daughters. So God has a responsibility for us men to treat the women in our lives. Your mom, your sister, the person you date, the person you sit next to in your biology class, the person you work in the cubicle next to. Treat them with honor, with respect, as one of God's beautiful and amazing creatures. Right on? All right. Single ladies. Here you go. Don't dress like a commodity or put up with being treated like one. Don't dress like one or let somebody treat you like one. If you let a man treat you like a commodity before you get married, again, how do you think he will treat you after you get married? Like a commodity. So don't let him do that. Don't let him get away with that. Don't let him get away with being a jerk. And I just want to encourage you. I get this question all the time from single women. Is there any hope? Are there any real men? Yes, there are real men. But let God make him a man before you try and make him a husband. That's what I would encourage. Too many women think, no, I can fix him. I can heal him. I know it's broken, but he hasn't had a relationship with me yet. And I'm telling you, any married ladies, you're good at this, because so we need to talk with you. I've not seen it happen. I've seen God change people's lives and hearts, but I've not seen a woman do that. So I want to encourage you. Let God do that work, and women, do not let Him treat you any less than the beautiful creation that God has made you to be. All right? Fourth one. Get out of debt. Get out of debt. Marriage has enough strain and stress of its own. Don't bring financial debt. It's my encouragement to you. Don't bring financial debt into your marriage relationship. And here's another thing about debt. Debt is one of those things that is a past predictor of behavior. It is a pathway. You get into debt because of a certain mindset. So debt is not just money that I owe. Debt is also a way of thinking about money. So that is a past behavior or past performance that shows what future behavior might be like. So I would encourage you, get out of debt. Bring into marriage debt-free life. All right, number 5, break your bad habits. Break your bad habits. Marriage was not designed to break bad habits. In fact, those of you who are married, you now know that marriage magnifies everything. The good gets so much better, and the bad gets so much worse, right?
Yeah.
And we wish it's just like, you came out of it, you were just the perfect husband, and now you've got somebody who sees the depths of your greatness and the depths of your ugliness, right?
Yeah.
Marriage was not meant to be the environment in which we just break all of our bad habits. So I would encourage you, if you're single, utilize these years of your life to develop new habits and to break old ones. Yeah. Utilize these years of your life to become the person that you would want to marry. All right? You guys with me so far? Yeah. Okay. 6.1, learn self-control. Learn self-control. Self-control now will prepare you for self-control later. Here's what Paul told the Thessalonians, the same guy that we read previously. He wrote this. He said this: it is God's will. So, in fact, if you're just a follower, you just begin following Christ, this is really helpful. If you want to know what God's will is, God has a specific will for each one of us, but He also has a general will for all of us. Specific will is the way that God's made you specifically and what He's called you individually to do. General will is God's will for all followers of Christ. And so here is God's general will. It is God's general will that all of you should be sanctified. And that word sanctified, it just means set apart. It means holy. It means set apart for God's service. That you should be sanctified, set apart for God's service. That you should, and here's how you do this, you should avoid sexual immorality. So be set apart for God's purpose and avoid sexual immorality. And that each of you should learn to control his or own body in a way that is holy and that is honorable. So we do this before marriage so that when we get into marriage, we've learned self-control and can continue to surrender ourselves to somebody else, knowing that we practice holiness and being honorable before we got married. Because what you practice before, you will carry into after. And so Paul says, look, learn to control yourself before so that when you get into it, you will have developed the control that you need to practice it in marriage. Because again, a ring, unfortunately, does not change a thing. But God does. And then He asks us to partner with in this. And so, let me make it real specific for our culture, because Paul didn't live in our culture. I think he'd be speaking specifically to, relationships outside of marriage. So, he would look at the temple and say, remember the temple and how that was how you used to engage. Don't go there. I don't want you engaging with prostitutes anymore. I think if he were here today, he would be red light, warning, flashing sign. You know that smartphone that you have in your hand? You know that iPad that you have? You know that the video monitor that you have? You know that computer that you have? Things are popping up on that thing all the time. And I want to protect you. Learn self-control now. Because if you don't have it now, the weirdest thing happens. It doesn't get better after marriage. It actually gets more intense. Nobody ever told us that, right? Yeah. Right, guys? Nobody ever told us that. They told us that this was the gap between being not married and being married, and then once you get married, you're engaging in sexual relationships, and then the temptation isn't as much. And it's just the opposite. The temptation is strong when you're single, so you have to learn then to control yourself, because when you get married, the temptation just grows. Because there is so much more at stake. Your soul is at stake. Your marriage is at stake. Your sexual relationship with your wife and how you actually see her is at stake. And I don't have time to go into this, but there are studies that are showing how pornography it's not aiding happy sexual relationships. It is actually destroying it, because it is unraveling the fabric of how a man and woman see each other and see the act of sexuality. Which makes total sense, because when we live against God's design, we do not flourish as a culture, as a society. But God, when we live in accordance with His design and we learn to control ourselves, then we bring into marriage something that is beautiful and something that is wonderful. All right, moving on. I'm going to say this last one. Get involved in church. Get involved in church. Avoid living together, but get involved in church. Get involved in church. Surround yourself. Be a part of a community. If you're brand newly married, have people in your life whose marriage you feel is strong, that can mentor you, that can help you be a married person. One of the things that we do in this church, one of the reasons why we believe in it so strongly, is because we believe that we were not meant to follow Christ alone, but rather in community there is strength. And so we do these things called grace groups. They're just smaller communities of people that gather together on a weekly basis. And in those communities, we are helping each other follow Christ. And there is Bible study. We'll take the message that is preached here on Sunday. We'll also pray for one another, and we'll support one another in our relationship with Christ. We need that. All of us need that, especially if you're married. Especially if you're married. All the married fellas can I hear it? Threw you off, right? All right, so here's my hope for us. My hope for especially our singles. And worship team come join us. My hope for us is that you would maximize this season of your life. I can't tell you how long it's going to be. I don't know. I do know this, that if you seek first God's kingdom and His righteousness, all the things you and I need in this lifetime, they will be added to us. He will give you the desires of your heart. Look, if you can trust Him as a follower of Christ, that Jesus actually rose from the dead, and that He will raise you up on the last day, you can also trust Him with this important area of your life. Right on? So my encouragement would be maximize this time of your life. Maximize it as a gift from Almighty God. And in this season of your life, instead of just looking for the right person, let God shape you into becoming the right person. The kind of person that can stand at an altar and make a commitment of their life, a covenant, as we talked about last week with somebody else, and follow through with that promise. That's what God has for each of us. But it takes us doing the hard work on the front end of marriage so that we bring in a track record on the back end of marriage. And if you're married today, I want to encourage you to continue to fulfill your commitment to one another. I want to encourage you to continue to do that committed to the other person. However many years ago it was.